let's go. I would also recommend maybe possibly finding a calculator for this session today. So this module is going to talk about your deeper diving. So as a sports diver, you then qualify to dive to 35 meters with your depth progression, and you really start to take into account nitrogen now and the effects of that. So the nitrogen effects, nitrogen narcosis is something we're going to look at, what effect oxygen can have on you. The fact that now we're going into decompression diving and decompression stops, it's not just straight up to the surface anymore. Dive planning using tables. We're going to have a bit of an issue with that because normally we've got paper copies of tables for you guys to have, but we're going to have to make do with the computer today. We're going to understand dive computers. Also, that's easier if we actually could show you a dive computer, but we're going to have to get through it. Traveling and diving, so going abroad, going on holiday, how we're going to be a safe diver, and then the use of nitrox if we're going deeper. So the first bit I'm going to cover is probably the most difficult part of this lecture, and it's the partial pressures of breathing gas. I'm going to try my best to explain it, but please do put your hand up or put something in the chat if you don't understand, because it is quite a difficult concept to get your head around, but once you get it, it'll be easier. Partial pressure. So in a mix of gases, so in the atmosphere right now that we're sat in, the pressure is 1 bar. So that's the total pressure, and that's the sum of all the different pressures of the different gases that are in the atmosphere. So we say air is at 1 bar, but what's in air? We know that we've got 21% oxygen, and then let's say, for the sake of this, 79% of nitrogen, okay? That means that in that 1 bar, 0.2 bar of that is the pressure of oxygen. And 0.8, I'm rounding here, so 79%, 0.8. 0.8 bar of that is going to be the nitrogen. So you need to think about splitting up the pressures within air, which is a mix of gases, and summing it all into one pressure. So here, just like I just said, so you've got your 21% oxygen, which gives you your 0.21 bar of O2 in the air. So out of that 1 bar, you've got these two different gases exerting different pressures. On a dive, you get an increase in ambient pressure. What that means is the pressure around you. As you go deeper, you know the pressure increases. And that gives you an increase in the partial pressure of oxygen and nitrogen. So if you go to 2 bar, you're then going to have 0.4 bar of O2 and double, so 1.6 bar of nitrogen, for example. Oh, there you go, it comes up. I didn't know we had to do these little fancy graphics. So then you've got 3 bar, again, it's just 3 times what it was at 1 bar. If you understand that, we're on good stead. If you understand what I'm on about here, can you please put your hand up if you don't understand? Because we'll be using this a lot today. Somewhat comforting. So this is where we start to use a bit of maths and a bit of formulae. You will need to know these for the exam, maybe, possibly, but they're quite simple. And obviously we're all university students, so I think we can probably get our heads around this. The fraction of your oxygen in the mix of gas that you've got is the percentage of oxygen in the gas divided by 100. It is literally just a fraction. So if you've got nitrox 36, that's 36% of oxygen. So it's 36 out of 100% that's oxygen, so it's 0.36. That's just a fraction of it. It's like if you got like 36 in a test out of 100, it's just a fraction. That's pretty simple. Your oxygen partial pressure, though, is then that fraction times by the absolute pressure. So if you're using nitrox 32, so 32% oxygen at 30 meters, you're going to have 32 divided by 100, which is giving you 0.32. And at 30 meters, you're at 4 bar. You should all know that. At 1 bar, at sea level, you're at 1 bar. For every 10 meters you go down, you add another bar. So therefore, we're at 4 bar. So if we're using nitrox 32 at 30 meters, we times these two together and we get 1.28 bar. That is your oxygen partial pressure. I would advise writing this on maybe a little sticky note and sticking it somewhere useful. But that's just what I think. Your safety limits. So we do have maximums on these numbers. So your partial pressure of oxygen should be maximum 1.4. If you're exceeding that, then you can be in real trouble in terms of, we'll look at the issues that come along with oxygen later, but that can present its own issues then. You don't want to exceed that. Another thing you don't want to exceed is your maximum operating depth. So that is the depth at which the partial pressure of your oxygen is 1.4. So if you go on to the previous slide, you can see that your partial pressure is dictated by the mixture you're using and the depth. And therefore, the depth that you want to go to is going to be dictated by your partial pressure. Okay, so it depends whichever you reach first. If you reach this partial pressure limit first, don't go any deeper. And if you reach the depth first, don't push it. So for example, your maximum partial pressure is 1.4 divided by the mix, which is nitrox 32, is going to give you your maximum operating depth. So 1.4 we've said is a maximum. Nitrox 32 as a fraction is 0.32, which is 4.38 bar, and then we work backwards from the bar to the depth. So we know that 4 bar is 30 meters. Do a bit of maths and you get out 33.8 meters. That's the deepest you can go on nitrox 32. If that's the mix that you're breathing, you can only go to 33.8 meters. There is a partial pressure table. So the BSAC do nitrox decompression tables and they have a partial pressure table. So it doesn't contain anything greater than 1.4 partial pressure. It won't let you even think about going past that partial pressure. But it will give you the maximum operating depth for very common mixes. So the maximum operating depth for air is 51 meters. So you could breathe just normal air at 51 meters, but you can go any deeper than that. For nitrox 32, the maximum you're looking at is 33 meters. And if you're breathing nitrox 36, and 27 meters is the deepest that you can go. So it contains a depth at 3 meter intervals. So you have to kind of go for the more conservative one, because you might be able to push it to 28 meters, but you would stay at 27 meters because it's in 3 meter intervals. Again, safety limits, we're all about being a safe diver now, a responsible diver. Do not exceed your maximum operating depth. So you're not exceeding your partial pressure when it gets to 1.4, and you're not exceeding that maximum operating depth. We put those in place, or BSAC put those in place, so that you're not putting yourself at more risk than needs be. You choose a mix that's great, has a maximum operating depth greater than where you're planning to go. So for this nitrox 32, it's saying I can go to 33.8 meters. I wouldn't take that on a 33 meter dive. You would take that on maximum like a 30 meter dive, because it gives you a bit of safety if you go deeper than that a bit. If you drop accidentally and you're not looking at your depth, you're still safe. So you wouldn't take that on a 33 meter dive. So if you've got 36% and you're going down to 30 meters, that's okay, as long as you're not doing decompression dives. It gets more complicated when you start adding decompression stops into the mix. Your nitrogen. So in Ocean Diver, if you did Ocean Diver, you will have learned about on and off gassing. And you should kind of understand the process of that. So the change in partial pressure will also change your off gassing. So if you're increasing the partial pressure of nitrogen, if you're increasing the partial pressure of a gas, more nitrogen will be absorbed or released into tissues. So a higher pressure of nitrogen, you're being you're breathing in, and the higher pressure around you is going to force the nitrogen into your tissues. So you're going to be on-gassing more. But if you've got a low partial pressure of nitrogen, a low pressure around you, you're going to be off-gassing, which happens when you ascend. If you're going deeper, the ambient pressure around you increases, so you're going to intake more nitrogen. Or if you're there for longer, I mean, it's just a longer time for it to enter your bloodstream and your body tissues, so you're obviously going to get a higher uptake of nitrogen. On and off gassing happens at different rates. You also cover this in ocean divers, so you've got fast tissues, which is where the on and off gassing happens really quickly. The nitrogen's free to come and go. Things that have good blood supply, so your brain, your heart, are quite quick to take on and get rid of nitrogen because there's a good blood supply, so the blood's always flowing. But then you've got your slow tissues, so if there's not a very good blood supply, things like your bones or high fat content tissue is going to off gas much slower than things like your heart. The ascent of your dive is quite short compared to the time you've spent going down and taking on that gas. If you're thinking you're on gassing from the minute you start descending and all the time you're swimming along, that's the main part of your dive. You're always on gassing. The ascent is relatively short compared to all of that. So even when you've completed a dive and you've got out, you haven't finished off gassing. You continue to off gas while you're just sat on the side. It takes quite a long time. I'm not sure on the actual time scale that it takes to completely off gas to go back to normal. But it does take quite a while. Oh, you've got your tissues, your blood, and your lungs are in there. If you increase the pressure around you, you're increasing the nitrogen. I don't see why you would be underwater for 12 hours, but we move. As you decrease the pressure, you obviously start. I really hope you can't hear all these ocean diver messages. You start releasing those gases, but as you can see, it takes quite a long time to get rid of all the nitrogen that's built up. Problems that come along with this are your nitrogen narcosis, and then also you've got to think about your decompression planning for all this off-gassing you need to do. Nitrogen narcosis is something that we don't cover before because it only becomes apparent until about 30 meters, which is you guys now. When you're diving at those depths, this is something that is really prominent. It affects everyone, and we generally try and take you guys on a dry dive to go and try it out. So you sit in a chamber and they take you down to 50 meters, but you just sat in your clothes. And we let you guys experience this because you don't notice until it happens to you, okay? It can be noticed shallower than 30 meters, but it generally doesn't tend to appear. And the effects get worse or increase with depth. So at 30 meters, it might be mild, but at 35, 40 meters, it can get quite severe. The cause of this, there's a few different theories. It's not completely set in stone, but they think that the nitrogen goes into your nerve cells. Obviously, on gas, it's gone into your tissues. But that affects the transmission of impulses. If any of you did biology, you'll know about all the synapses and the little electrical impulses that go along. But the nitrogen basically interrupts that, so your nerves don't transmit the right messages. So then you've got the raised partial pressure of nitrogen. So the impairment or you know the change to those nerve transmissions is going to be greater. So the higher your partial pressure, the deeper you are basically, or the different mixes can give you a higher likelihood of nitrogen narcosis. And the effects of this sound pretty fun. You know, similar to anesthetic alcohol, you might feel like you're drunk. Obviously, that's not the best thing to do when you're literally relying on yourself and your body's relying on you in case anything goes wrong. But that is what they describe it as similar to, and that's why we try and get you guys out to the dry dive so you can actually feel it and how it feels for you. Oh, nice pint of beer. So your nitrogen narcosis and symptoms. So if you did ocean dive, you might recognize this picture. This is the incident pit. It's basically how an incident will escalate and go from quite bad to absolutely traumatic very quickly. So we try and if you're at the top of the pit, we try and get out of that as soon as possible. Otherwise, it's a big black hole and you get sucked in. It just gets worse and worse and worse, and it's quite difficult to deal with. Between 10 and 30 meters, you've got a mild impairment of your reasoning, and you might be slightly overconfident or anxious. It depends which way you go. But literally, like, you've had a few beers, like, you might not be thinking reasonably. You might be like, yeah, I'll just go over there and look at that. Or you feel confident. You're like, yeah, I've got enough air to do this. You wouldn't normally think that. You'd be like, oh, we should probably start ascending. But if you've got mild nitrogen narcosis, you might be like, yeah, it's fine, we'll carry on, no worries. So your brain function, your memory, your concentration, yeah, they can all be affected between 10 and 30 meters. So that's where you guys dive at the moment. Going deeper than that, 30 to 50 meters, your judgment is really starting to get impaired. So you've got, if you ask your body if they're okay and they take a while to respond because they're struggling to like think about how they're meant to portray that to you, that can be a sign. Making the wrong choices. You might read your contents gauge wrong, and you might say, yeah, I've got 200 bar, and your mate's like, how? I've only got 90. What are you doing? If you're fixated on just like certain things, like you have like a one-track mind, or you might be anxious, you could get confused about where you're going, whether you're going up, down, left, right, west, north. You can get really confusing. If you're overconfident, I mean, that confidence can continue if you're feeling confident at 30 meters and then you go deeper because you're feeling confident. The nitrogen narcosis just gets worse. You're like, I'm so good at this diving malarkey. I'm going to go to 50 meters because why not? Obviously, that's not a great idea. And then you've got your dizziness and hallucinations. So this is when it starts to get not funny anymore. It's, you know, none of it's a laugh, but if your mate is like taking a while to say, okay, you're like, oh, come on, my friend, get it together. But now you've got dizziness, seeing stars, or things are moving, or the room's spinning. The dive site is spinning. Beyond 50 meters, it's everything that I've just talked about, a million times worse. It just gets so much more serious. If you're beyond 50 meters and you've got nitrogen narcosis, you've got a serious problem. And that's the reason that BSAC recommends that 51 meters, I think I said earlier, so 50 meters is the limit for air diving, because obviously there's a higher percentage of nitrogen in air, so you've got more likely to get nitrogen narcosis. So beyond that, it's really quite dangerous. Factors to consider for nitrogen narcosis, things that can increase the effect of it. So if you're going to get narked at 30 meters, these are things that can increase it. So if you're scared anyway, and then you get nitrogen narcosis at 30 meters, then you might feel more scared, and it just makes it worse for you. If you've been drinking the night before, that can also increase the risk factors. Also, some sedatives or some antihistamines. I didn't know that. If you're taking any medication, you should check that you're okay to dive with a dive medical professional. If we obviously ask you before you sign up, and if you guys have been here for years, we know that you're okay to dive. But if you do go on any new medication, then it's good to check with a dive professional, or just try and tell one of us guys and we can find out for you whether it's okay for you to dive. Yeah, diving hangover, wouldn't recommend. Obviously, it's not great anyway. If you feel like crap and you're at 20 meters and you need to chunder, then it's probably not the best place to be anyway. And then if you've got nitrogen narcosis to worry about, it's just not worth it. You've got increased physical effort and fatigue, so just actually finning along might be tiring for you, and it increases your breathing rate then, because you're tired, you're breathing more heavily, then your gas consumption increases, so you're burning through your 12-litre cylinder, and your body's not used to that air consumption. Then you might have an out-of-air situation coming on, and it can just get worse from there. Instant pit again, small thing like being tired from diving can then go into an out-of-air rescue situation. Cold water and poor visibility. If you can't see anything and you're cold, then you can be more susceptible to nitrogen narcosis. And also rapid descent. If you dump all your air and end up at the bottom at 18, 20, 30 meters, all of a sudden you're going to on-gas ASAP, because that pressure around you is going to force that nitrogen straight into your tissues, and that is not good. That is why we do slow controlled descents, and that's why we do slow controlled ascents. Things that can reduce the effect of nitrogen narcosis, if you don't want to experience it, you might try one of these, I guess you could call them methods. Concentration on a task. So if you stay calm, if you're really struggling with an inflate hose or something, and you stay calm and really focus on it and get to grips with it again, if you concentrate, then you can kind of Nitrogen-decompress yourself if you really, really concentrate on one thing. If you acclimatize yourself, so if you acclimatize yourself to the depth, so you're not scared when you're at 30 meters, that's why we do depth progression. So you guys, ocean divers, PADI equivalents, are at like 18, 20 meters. We do a dive at 20 meters, 25, then 30, and then 35. You don't have to do them all. You don't have to do them all in one day. You don't have to go all the way down to 35 meters, but we do it gradually so you guys feel ready to take that next step and you're not already anxious. So if you did get knocked, it's not going to get worse for you guys. Being mentally and physically fit, I mean, I'm not one to preach about physical fitness. If you asked me to run 5K, I'd probably tell you to get lost. But if you're physically fit, then you're not going to struggle with the finning. And if you're mentally prepared, I mean, if you're in a bad place mentally, it can just get worse when you start thinking about all the bad things that could happen rather than the actual good experiences you could have on this dive. You guys are sports divers now, you've been out and about, you've been to Stony Cove probably, you've been abroad maybe, you know what good can come from diving. So if you're mentally in the right place to go diving, then you'll have a really good time. If you are knocked, so if this has happened to you and you are struggling to do an okay sign and your mate's laughing at you, the chances are your buddy is too. They're probably going to start laughing at you and you both be giggling at each other underwater. Monitoring between the two of you, so that constant buddy check underwater, is really important to spot this. It helps if you know your buddy, if you know what they're normally like and you know how they normally act underwater. It can be quicker to spot what's going on if you know them and you're friends with them and you can spot that they're knocked earlier. It's easy to sort out. How do we fix it? Just go shallower, just ascend a bit. I mean, if you get to 30, you've been descending slowly, you get to 30 meters, you're like, oh, what? I don't feel right. Go up to 25 meters, get up to 22, 25 meters, and just swim along for a bit, and you'll be like, yep, this is fine, let's carry on descending, and just go a bit slower. So the nitrogen equilibrates throughout your body more equally. So decompression, this is something you guys haven't done before. Decompression diving is something that ocean divers don't get to do. But as a sports diver, you're now moving on to decompression diving. The difference here is your ascent. So as you're ascending, the nitrogen's coming out of your tissues, and they off-gas in different tissues at different rates. We just talked about that, the fast tissues, the slow tissues. Here, there's the gases leaving. The body can tolerate the certain excess of nitrogen. So like I said, when you get to the surface, you're not going to be completely free of nitrogen, completely back to normal. You continue to off-gas when you're at the surface. But your body can tolerate, no, there's excesses, nothing major. A level maybe reach where a direct ascent to the surface, so if you're an ocean diver going along 15 meters and you directly go to the surface, you're going to be fine, no worries, like we'll deal with it after, no problems. But if you've been swimming along at 35 meters for half an hour, going straight to the surface from there might cause you serious problems such as decompression illness. So that's when we need to start thinking about the decompression stops that we're going to do to avoid the illness. There you go. If you come up too quickly, things will burst, big red light flashes, oh dear, something's gone horribly, horribly wrong. Tables and decompression computer, any dive computer mainly, will indicate the need for your decompression stops, especially mine. It will flash at me, a little alarm sound, and it has like a timer. I know the club ones have like a little beep and they have a timer and tell you how long to stop for. And they basically tell you to stop. It's quite handy. You don't need to think about it beforehand. If you've got a computer, obviously if you're using tables, you plan that all out, you write it all down, you take it with you, and you check your depth gauge and you're like, right, I wrote down here that at 9 meters I need to do a 6-minute stop. So then you look at you're like, right, I'm at 9 meters, and then you start your little timer for 6 minutes. And this just allows that the excess of nitrogen can come out your body before you continue your ascent. So you ascend to a shallower depth, off gas there for a bit, and ascend in stages rather than all in one. So oxygen exposure, we know that we breathe oxygen and it's what keeps us going. Okay. Your partial pressure scale here. So here we are on land, you sat at your desk or wherever you are at 0.21 bar. That's the partial pressure of oxygen where you're sat right now. Unless you're somewhere old. Here you've got, if you're sat at these partial pressures for a very long time, 0.5, 1 bar, any of these, you've got a long-term toxicity. You have to stay there for a very, very long time to be exposed to that toxicity. If you're going above 1.4, which we said was the absolute limit, things can go south very, very quickly. Anything beyond 1.6, you're going to be hyperoxic. That's too much oxygen. So a high concentration of oxygen is toxic. We need it to live. It's what, you know, you wouldn't presume it's toxic, but it's at high concentrated, the high pressures. You need to know your maximum operating depth and keep within your oxygen exposure limits. You're not going above 1.4 bar because there's that risk in a very short time scale. Hyperoxia. So I've just mentioned if you go above 1.6, you're going to become hyperoxic. So it's basically too much oxygen. Hyper, too much, and then oxygen. If you're using nitrox, so it's above 21% oxygen, so you've got 32%, 36%. The partial pressure of oxygen increases greater with depth. And at the partial pressures, it becomes toxic. So it's really important that we stay below that 1.4 level. There's two different effects of hyperoxia, both equally as bad as each other. The first one you've got is your central nervous system toxicity. For those of you, you know, central nervous system, everything that connects your body together. When your partial pressure is above 1.4, even for short periods of time, you can experience this central nervous system toxicity. Then you've got your whole body oxygen toxicity. And this is when it's above 0.5 bar, so pretty much all of dive. For long periods of time, though, like long periods of time. Often the dive and the diving experience that you have, so if you're a sports diver going at 25 meters, you're not going to be there for long enough for it to cause this toxicity. But if you were like a deep diver and you were on bigger cylinders, you're staying there for a longer time, that's when you might start to see these issues. But this one here, the central nervous system toxicity, is something that would more likely happen to you guys due to the nature of the time it takes to experience whole body oxygen toxicity. Your CNS toxicity, the causes of that, what can actually cause that to happen to you, is if you don't analyse the mix. So I talked about analysing mixes in a lecture the other week with you guys, and how to use a nitrox analyzer, and you hold it next to it and it tells you how much oxygen's in the mix. If you don't analyse that properly and you say, oh yeah, I've got 32%, but then actually you've got 33.8% or whatever mix, something higher, your partial pressure is going to be greater and you're going to think, I've just reached 1.4, when no, actually you're above that now because you've analysed it wrong. And also poor dive planning or dive conduct, so not sticking to your dive plan. If you're going beyond that 1.4 partial pressure, that's really going to scupper things up for you guys. It's caused by the exposure to high partial pressure oxygen, or long exposures to elevated, so not necessarily exceeding your 1.4, but long exposures to higher levels. Your tolerance, a bit like an alcohol tolerance, varies from person to person. I don't know why it changes for person. It could be the size of you or how absorbent your tissues are of nitrogen or oxygen. And it also can vary day to day for the same person. So it really just does depend. And that's why that 1.4, I would say, somewhat conservative. You would never exceed that, though. Things in BSAC are put in place to be conservative. So if you do exceed it, you might be okay. It's like an absolute for you guys that 1.4 is the maximum partial pressure that you reach. To measure the uptake of the oxygen in your body, you don't exceed that partial pressure. I don't think I've said that enough times. I'm going to go back and watch this and realise I said it about 40 million times, but it's really important. And also ensure that the length of your exposure to that partial pressure is within your safe limits. So the signs and symptoms of this The reaction generally occurs above 1.4 bar. Again, do not exceed this and you should be okay. Your signs and symptoms. So you've got your convulsions, so like a fit, pretty much. Your body will convulse. Visual disturbances, seeing things, whether it be like stars or like hallucinating or like just colours. Ears, you might have hearing disturbances. I don't know if you guys have heard like tank bangers underwater, but it's quite disorientating anyway, where the sound comes from, and you can just start to hear things. Nausea, feeling sick. Twitching, so not quite a full-on convulsion, but your arm might start twitching, or your leg, or your eye. Irritability, I mean, if you're miserable anyway, then like I said, if you know your body and you know they're miserable anyway, then irritability isn't going to be one of the things that you are alarmed about. But if you've got quite a happy-go-lucky buddy and they start getting really angry with you underwater, then you might have a problem. And dizziness, so things might start to spin. You might start to get a bit of like vertigo underwater, which isn't nice. Happened to me, not ideal. Until convulsions begin. So if they're just miserable with you, they feel a bit sick in their arms, twitching. They're minor symptoms. You've got a problem, but you're not quite in the danger zone, as I would call it. All of these things get severely, gradually worse until you reach convulsions and passing out, and then that is serious. That is not a good situation to be in. These things happen in any order. You can have one of them, all of them. They might get them backwards, forwards. They might get a few in the middle. You just need to know that they are what you're looking for. And they can increase in severity, like I just said. It might be a twitching finger to begin with, and your whole arm starts going, and then you're having convulsions. The convulsions come in different phases, so they can occur in any order. I'll put them all on the screen. So they are different phases. So you've got your tonic, clonic, and relaxation phase. They don't necessarily go through in this order, but they can happen in any order. And they might not experience all of these phases. You would hope that you can get them in the last phase. So your tonic phase, your casualty's gonna become really stiff, like a statue, and hold their breath. Now, if they hold a breath in, they're going to start to ascend. That's obviously going to be an issue, especially holding breath. We teach you guys not to hold your breath. Do not hold your breath ever. You've got your clonic phase, which is where they're essentially going to have a fit, the convulsion, and then you've got your relaxation phase. So it's literally when they become like a floppy ragdoll. The easiest situation for you as a dive buddy to deal with. If they are completely limp, you can literally grab hold of them and assist them in that way. Then they might lose a mouthpiece at that point because they're so relaxed. Relaxed sounds like the wrong word. Because they're so like limp, they might lose a mouthpiece. That's something you need to be aware of. You do not lift them in the tonic or clonic phases. For the clonic phase, that's because if they're having a fit and you go over to help them and they might hit you in the face, they might hit your mask off, well, then you can't see them, you're no use to man or beast. They might hit your regulator out your mouth, then you've got your own problem to deal with, and you've got to leave them anyway to get your regulator back. They might get caught on you, and then they're still convulsing and they're dragging you around with them. So we say in that situation, you just move backwards, you let them have their clonic phase, you let them convulse. Then when they enter the relaxation phase, they go all floppy. That's when you go and help them. The tonic phase, they're rigid, they're holding their breath. Do not lift them in that phase. Only the relaxation phase should you be going to assist the casualty. Even if you ascend somewhat and the partial pressure is reduced because you've ascended to a smaller pressure, these signs can still occur. So if you ascend 10 meters and they're still convulsing, that is not your fault. These things will continue until they can get further medical attention. The accident management. So I've just told you the phase that you should attempt to lift them in, the relaxation phase. So you should be doing a controlled buoyant lift to the surface. Decompression illness, when you get to the top and you haven't off-gas properly, is totally solvable. We can put you in a recompression chamber and sort that out. If someone's convulsing underwater and they're not conscious and they might stop breathing, that's something that we can't sort out while you're underwater. You're going to do a controlled buoyant lift. You're not shooting to the surface. It's still going to be controlled. But it's better for you two to be at the surface where the surface cover can help you out than you be at the bottom struggling with an unconscious casualty. If the casualty is rigid, they're holding their breath or they're convulsing, obviously you do not attempt to lift them in that situation. I've just explained why. Wait until they've relaxed and then you can lift them. There is a risk of embolism in the other phases, so the relaxation phase is the best phase to be lifting them in. We're removing them from the water, so they're still, if they're at the surface, we need to get them out of the water. We're monitoring respirations, and then you can call for other medical attention while you're at the top. You should be administering oxygen for CNS toxicity. There's certain conditions and what medication they need, but in CNS toxicity you do administer oxygen. Okay, how to avoid CNS toxicity? So high CO2 levels will reduce the tolerance to CNS toxicity, so don't over-exercise. We breathe in oxygen and we breathe out CO2. Your body produces CO2 when your muscles are working. If you're doing some underwater gymnastics, you're going to be producing a lot of CO2. That then leaves you more at risk to CNS toxicity. So stay calm. Diving's not, intensive. It's not meant to be a workout. Sometimes it does feel like it, but it's just for you to relax, go look at some fish, some wrecks. So don't over-exercise. Breathe normally. I mean, don't be holding your breath anyway. Just breathe as you would. Being sports divers now, I'm sure you're not too worried about putting a mouthpiece in and going under the water. So breathing normally helps. Don't exceed that partial pressure of oxygen, 1.4 bar. And don't exceed your planned maximum operating depth. Monitoring your oxygen exposure, you need to monitor the CNS toxicity. There is a table in BSAC. That is the tiniest copy of that table I've ever seen. I apologise. I wish I had some copies for you guys to look at. It makes it a bit clearer. But during dive planning, we use this oxygen exposure limits table to check the single exposure, so the maximum single exposure. So that's like the high levels of PO2. And then the maximum 24-hour exposure. So that's the long-term thing I talked about earlier, that you guys wouldn't be under the water long enough. But if you're doing several dives in one day, it kind of adds up. So if you're doing a lot of dives, that can also add to your long exposure of the partial pressure of oxygen. Your dive computer, especially your dive computer, will know how many times you've been in the water that day and will know what partial pressure of oxygen you're at. So that will tell you, it will adjust every time. So the first dive, it might say you can go 45 minutes at 20 meters, let's say. But the next dive, it might be like, you can only do half an hour because of the risk of CNS. But it all accounts for that. And obviously then you've got also dive planners and whatnot. Using this table, it's really hard to explain to you guys without having one in front of me. Again, I apologise. This left-hand column, that like mint green.
I've got the copy if you want me to put it up.
Oh, do you want to share your screen then? Should I stop presenting?
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, bit of technical.
There you go.
Right, okay. So that's the oxygen toxicity table. You can probably see it a bit better now. The left-hand side, this mint green column says PO2. That's your partial pressure of oxygen. So you find the partial pressure level in that column and look at the associated toxicity dose in the exposure time column. So if you look on the top row, if you're... Oh, this is so hard to explain without like pointing. Oh yeah, zoom in a bit. We're all a bit blind. If you just do the thing with your, like, if you go on the mouse pad and like pinch to zoom, it might work. Oh, there we go. Right, that's massive. Cool. So I'll just give you an example. So if we're at 1.4 bar for 32 meters, we're trying to work out the percentage of the CNS, which isn't meant to exceed 80%. So the maximum value of this percentage column, so the like yellow columns in this situation, when we add all these together, when I show you how to do it, should not exceed 80. If we're under 80, we're probably on a good win. So the partial pressure of oxygen we're looking at is 1.4 bar, nicely circled down there, and we're going to be there for 32 minutes. Now, if you look on the top, we've got 30 minutes, but not 32. So we're going to go to 30 minutes, sorry. And then we're going to go down to the 1.4, and you can see that it says there's a 20.10% risk of CNS. So that's only 30 meters. Now this one's a bit simpler. If you want 32 meters, then you just go to the 2 minute column, sorry. Find the same one again for your 1.4 partial pressure, which gives you 1.34%, and you just add those two together. That's literally it. So you get 21.44, quick maths. You literally add those two values together. So if you were doing like 37 minutes, for example, you'd get it from the 30-minute column, the 5-minute column, and the 2-minute column, and you add them all together. And we are not exceeding 80%. Okay. Just leave that table up there. I'm just going to give you guys one to do. I don't know if there's one in the PowerPoint already, but I'm just going to do one now while we've got the table up. Okay, so I'm going to carry on with the partial pressure of 1.4. So I'm going to reach my maximum partial pressure for 43 minutes. What would the percentage risk of CNS be at 1.4 partial pressure for 43 minutes? Okay, so 28.81. Someone got. So yes, 28.81 was the right answer, or at least it's what I got. If you didn't get that, I'm just going to tell you now how I did it. So we're at 1.4 partial pressure. So find that bottom row, and if I had these in front of me, I'd put a piece of paper over the rest of it because it makes it easier to see. Use your pen to point at the screen or whatever you're doing. And then we're going for 43 minutes. So I'm going to start with the biggest number, so that's 40 minutes. So you go all the way across till you find that yellow column in 40 minutes, and it says there 26.80. So I've written that down on a piece of paper. Then I've got to work out 3 minutes. So I'm going to go across the 2 minutes, 1.34. I've added that. And then I'm adding a 0.67 from the 1 minute column. Bish, bash, bosh, do a bit of Carol Walder's maths, and you get 28.81. I hope that makes sense. I hope. I mean, someone got it, so I'm quite impressed, actually, because it took me a hot minute to do it. James, if you just want to share the PowerPoint, then you can carry on after I've finished. It just makes a bit more sense than me jumping back on.
Is that working?
No, I'm still looking at the CNS table.
There we go. No, that's the wrong one. That's last week's lecture.
DSMB's classic.
Yeah. I don't know why this isn't coming up. Oh, there we go. I'm not scrolling. There we go. that working?
Yeah, fantastic. So I've just said that your CNS shouldn't exceed 80%. So even if the example we just did, even if you're at your maximum partial pressure for 43 minutes, you're still at 28.81%, which is low compared to the maximum they state there. Obviously, you don't want to be in maximum partial pressure. You don't want to be there for too long. Whilst you're at the surface, the percentage risk is reduced by half every 2 hours. So if I did that dive at 9 o'clock in the morning, I'd come out at 9:45. By 11:45, I've only got like a 14 14% risk of CNS. Whatever remains, so if I went back in after 2 hours, so I've divided that by 2 and I've got my 14.4% chance, and then I go on another dive where I rack up another 28.81%, for example, I would then add that value together. So I add the remaining percentage from the last dive to the new percentage from this dive, and that's how you end up getting that 80%. It's not from like one long dive, it's from a series of smaller dives that all add up throughout the day. So after those 2 dives, I'm not really good at this maths, you'll be on about 43%. So you can see how that will rack up, because then after 2 hours you're going to have 20%, you do another 20% dive, it's kind of all piles up, but your computer luckily will go all through for you. Right, so quiz 1, James, if you want to stop sharing your screen for a minute, because you can, I'd rather just go on our side, but the quiz is on there. This
show the quiz, it's fine.
Yeah, quiz. So I've asked you guys a few questions already. What gas becomes toxic at depth, and do you know the name or the condition when it is toxic at depth? Oh, someone's woken up, right? So oxygen, and do you know what the name is for the toxicity of oxygen? I presume you've all got a book in front of you as well, and I presume it's in there, so. It's hyperoxia. If anyone's typing that, I'm sorry to ruin your parade, but I want to move on. Yeah, hyperoxia, hyper, too much, and then oxia, oxygen. There's 2 types of tissue that are involved in your on and off gassing. When I say types, 2 verbs, I think. So the 2 types of tissue involved in your on and off gassing. And then if you can give me an example of each. Okay, fantastic. So you've got your fast tissues, your slow tissues. Fast tissues such as the heart, lots of like blood vessels, and then slow tissues, bones, fat tissues that don't have a lot of blood flow. Are slow. And that is it from me. Now we go over to James.
Here we go. So we're looking now at the BSAC tables. So you should probably remember those from when you did your ocean diver, the blue ones. We'll have another look. I think I looked at them, had a look at them, but we're looking at them again. But we're looking at them when talking about decompression diving. So when you look at your tables, after you kind of track down from a depth and time, it might have a
Jay?
stop at the bottom. Yes.
It's not going through the PowerPoint on the actual meeting. I can see like the PowerPoint screen as if you're going to edit it and not the actual presenting of the PowerPoint.
Oh, can you not see the PowerPoint?
Well, I can see the PowerPoint. I can just, it's not flicking through the slides. If you press present in the bottom right, you might be able to click through it.
Try it again. Is that working now?
No, I don't know if it's just me.
Let me just try one sec.
I think the problem is you're just sharing the PowerPoint slide itself. Yeah, the PowerPoint itself. Yeah, that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had to rechange what I was showing for some reason. I haven't to do that any other week. It always works normally. Cool. So yeah, BSAC decompression stops. Dives, so they result in a surface code of G. So normally when you come up from a dive, you have a surface code tissue, or tissue surface code, there you go, that reduces over time, especially when over an ocean diver. When you do a deco dive, you will always come up on the highest surface code, which is G, and that's due to your stops. So the decompression stop is the time that you actually spend at that decompression depth. There are various depths, mainly 9 meters or 6 meters. Your computer may sometimes say to do one at 3 as well, but it's normally a safety stop. But sometimes they actually are required as deco stops due to the computer's algorithm. The dive time is this time from when you started descending to when you reach your decompression stop depth. So rather than adding on your deco stop minutes onto your time when you're working out what deco stop you need to do, you just do the time until you reach that depth to do your deco stop. So using the tables, the process is very much the same. But we need to look at the yellow row this time, where it says decompression stops. And also in the yellow part of the tables on the right there, which is indicated so lovely by the red or rectangle. So the length of the stop and the depth is indicated at the bottom of each column. So you can see here, if you look, say, at the top column, we go down to 18 meters, say, for 78 minutes. We will have to do a decompression stop at 6 meters of 3 minutes. And it tells you that's at that decompression stop time at the bottom of the column. So either there where it's pointing for deeper dives or higher up for the shallow dives. So you can see the shallower dives, we only have a stop at 6 meters. But as we get down to kind of beyond 20 meters, you need to start doing stops at 9 meters as well. And again, as with normal BSAC tables, you use the next depth or the next length of time if your actual time or depth isn't actually there. So an example here, table A. So going in on a surfacing code of A, or tissue code of A, to a depth of 27 meters, we use this column. So this row, not column. And we're having a dive time of 34 minutes, which we can see is there. We follow that down and we get to a decompression stop at 6 meters of 1 minute. So again, it's kind of just very similar to what you did with ocean diver tables. It's just making sure you keep an eye out for those stops. And surfacing code is G. Yeah, make sure you kind of take that in. So if we do 2 dives with stops, we might. So yeah, here this is an example of dives with stops. There's 2 of them. So we go for our first dive for 20 minutes. I don't know if it's not going to allow me to get my table up as well. Actually, what I can do. Oh no, it is. not doing what I wanted to do. So it's saying 33 minutes at 20 meters, 33 meters at 20 minutes. So if we go on to this, can you see the tables now? So we've gone down to 30 meters, wasn't it? Or 33 meters. So we're using this row here, and we're going for 20 minutes, which is here. There is, it's supposed to be a stop. Oh yeah, there is no stop needed. I don't know what's going on here then. That's weird. The book seems to be wrong. Oh no, what am I talking about? 33 meters. Here we go. 20 minutes. God, I don't know what I was looking at there. Sorry. 33 meters for 20 minutes. 17 is not 20, so we have to go over here to the 25. We can scroll down and we can see there's a 1 minute deco stop at 6 meters surfacing on G. Now, if we go back to the PowerPoint, surfacing on a G after a 1 minute stop at 6 meters. So we need to do a surface interval of 3.5 hours. We look at the surface interval table, which we have here. So we coming up on a G on the top line. We've set 3.5 hours, so we go between the 3 hour and the 4 hour mark, and we can see that we are now having a tissue code of C. So now that we have the tissue code of C, if you notice before when we did the first dive, we used, God, this is annoying. This is so much easier when in person. Seconds. Yeah, so before, here we are, we used the table A. That's because we had a tissue code of A. Now, after this 3.5 hour surface interval, we have a tissue code of C. So we can't be using table A anymore. We have to go down and we have to look for table C. So here we have table C. So the second dive here, it's telling us that we're going to be doing a 21 meter dive, which is down to here. And we're going to be doing it for 25 minutes. So again, we look across, we find 20, it's not quite 20, so we need to go over to the next one, so 26. If we scroll down from 26, we find that we now need a 3 minute stop at 6 meters. And we surface on a G. So hopefully you got that. It was a bit of a haphazard way of showing it due to tech at the moment. It's much easier to do if you have the tables in person. So if you look in your books, the sports diver book, you can see this exercise that we've just done, these 2 dives. If in your own time, if you're not too confident about this, you can find the BSAC tables online, and then you can do it yourself and look through it and get the same answers that they've got. So we can hopefully go back to the PowerPoint now. Too many tabs open. Can you all see the PowerPoint? I think you should be able to. So yeah, second dive of 21 meters for 25 minutes, 3 minutes at 6 meters, surfacing code G. So we're planning with 2 dives. This is again going to be quite painful. We will normally, I'll just skip through this. I think it's again, we've got the time of the first dive. You go down to the depth, go across to 30 minutes. And then you do the stop that it tells you to do, and you find your surfacing code. So for here, we're now given the time that the next dive is at. We started our previous dive at 9:30, and then we had a 30-minute dive, which means we surfaced at 10 o'clock. So 10 o'clock to 2:30 is a 2.5 hour surface interval. So we would go to the surface interval table again, and we would go across for 2.5 hours on. That's not 2.5 hours, 4.5 hours. What am I thinking? 4.5 hours from whatever tissue code we've surfaced at to find our new tissue code, and then we take the table for the correct tissue code. We go down to the depth, we find the time, and then we look down to find how many stops we've done, not how many stops we need to do. So that is just telling us the answers. So if you want to do this in your own time, they are there. Now, if we are doing nitrox, obviously we know nitrox is the highest oxygen percentage. We use their depth using a different set of tables. So we don't use the BSAC tables. We use these nitrox tables. So they're the green ones. So if you remember, green and yellow is nitrox, and blue and yellow is your standard air. They will all be for different percentages of nitrox. So this one we can see here is for 32%, and it's got 32 written at the top, and it has 32% written kind of behind the table, just so it's easier to not confuse them, so you can make sure you get the right ones. And again, it's just a matter of exactly the same principle. So you use the next greatest depth, you use the next longest time. So for this one, if you're going to a dive to 20 meters for 30 minutes, we go down to 21 meters, and we look across, and there's 19 minutes and 41 minutes. The 19 minutes is not long enough, so we go to the 41, and we go down, and there we go, 21 meters, 41 minutes. We come at a surface code of D with no stops. If you remember before, we did that exact same dive on air and we had to do a stop. This is why people use nitrox, is because you don't have to worry about doing so many stops. And you surface on a tissue code D. So find the depth again, groove across, just your standard procedure, but it's slightly different values than you would get doing air tables. This is all the same. It's going to take me ages to keep flicking between it. But you can see here 26 meters for 33 minutes on nitrox 32 gives a surface code of F. We've got a surface interval of 3 hours. So we've come up on an F, which is the second row. We move along to the 3, which is down on a C. I think it's going to point it out for you. Yep, there we go. So 3 hours. So we start our next dive with the table C for the exact same, or for the correct nitrox mix that we're using. Here, 32% table C, and then we would do 20 meters for 25 minutes. You would have one stop at 6 meters, and you would surface on a G. Does everyone feel like they would be happy doing this process? Just because I can try and go over it if you want me to, but it's gonna be a bit of a pain to do it. But I'm completely fine going over it. If anyone wants me to, just say in the chat or speak up, just so that I know that I can maybe skip over it. No, okay, so we'll try and not do it too much because pain. Actually, no, we'll do this one. I'll try and do it again. So that dive there is on. What's it on? That is on 26 meters for 33 minutes. So we get the nitrox tables up. So we have got, we're going down on the first dive, so we're using table A. So here we go, we've got our, this is our air table A, but we're using nitrox 32, so we scroll down, there's air 21, 27, 27, here we go, so we've got 32. So we're going down on tissue code A. We're going down for 26 meters for 33 minutes. So we find our depth, 27 meters, there's no 26. And we go across, there's no 33, so we go to 34. So we're going to surface on a tissue code of F. So obviously we would normally go to use table F, but we need to look at what our surface interval is. So we're being told in this example that our surface interval is 3 hours. So we go and find the table for intervals. Here we go. I think I should be able to see that. So we've come up on an F for 3 hours. Go across. We're now going to be on a C. So we now need to go back to the nitrox tables, and this time we're going to be using nitrox 32%, but table C, which is here. So our second dive is going to be for 20 meters. So he goes 21 on the table for 25 minutes. So we scroll all the way across. 17 is not enough. So we go 32. 32 gives us a 1 minute safety stop. Well, it's 1 minute deco stop, sorry, at 6 meters. And then tissue code of G. Hopefully you guys have kind of got that. It will become more apparent when you're doing it, the more times you do it. So I think in the exam you should be going, you'll have a set of tables to do it yourself, and you have to plan some dives. So we'll now go back to the PowerPoint. So now we want to look here at dive computers. So obviously we've just spent all that time planning our dives and looking at what we need to do. With dive computers, they can often do this for us. So they come in a range of models, and they have, so the club ones are the Cento Zoops. Imi's got a Cento Eon Core. She'll probably Steel, I think. Steel. She'll try and flex that to you at some point. So we've all got different computers. The different computers often use different algorithms, so they might give you different amount of time to spend on your deco stops to somebody else. So if your dive buddy has a slightly different time to do on their deco stop, you always stay with them for their stop if it's longer than yours, so that no one comes up until everyone has finished their stop. Just a thing to make sure you remember, so that no one kind of ditches their buddy because your computer's telling you you're fine. So computer functions, we will be looking at the power supply, which the battery just obviously provides power, and you get a warning when there's not enough battery. You've got the pressure transducer. Once your computer is on, this basically measures the pressure around you, the ambient pressure. There we go, pressure sensor. We then got the converter, which I believe converts the pressure reading into what your computer needs to work with. So yeah, analog to digital converter. There we go. Yeah, we've got the microprocessors. That is where all the memory is and where the calculations take place. So that's your little circuit board there. They have two types of memory. They have ROM, which is read-only memory, which is permanent, and it has basically the program steps in it, so that that's where it stores what it needs to do, which is quite the important part. So there's your ROM, and then you've also got your RAM, so your dive data and calculations. So that holds what you're doing on your most recent dive, or how deep you've gone, how how long you've been down there, and it often will hold your tissue code that you've gone down on. So say it's your second dive of the day, it will keep your data from the first dive, so it knows what tissue code you're in, and various other things that you've accumulated on that first dive. So for example, your oxygen levels, oxygen toxicity levels, and it then adds that on to your current dive. So there's your RAM. You've got the clock, which just as it does as it says, it kind of measures the time that you've been underwater for, your dive time. The screen shows you kind of the outputs, so it tells you how long you've been diving for, the depth you're at. You've probably all seen it on the club computers or other computers that you've used. Yeah, and then you've got an audible warning. So your computer will probably beep at you, say if you're ascending too quickly, or if you're ascending when it's told you to do a stop and you're not doing your stop. So a little unit in there, and then your controls, so your little buttons on the side, so allow you to control it. And then if you buy your own computer, make sure you read the manual. They're not the simplest pieces of kit. They've all got various things that they can do. So just make sure you read the manual so you know exactly what your computer wants you to do and how you can use it. So, yeah, it means you can be well acquainted with any of the readouts on the screen. So if something flashes up on your computer that you hadn't seen before, you will know what it means because you've read it in the manual. So when you're decompressing, it simulates the nitrogen loading into the body when you're descending, and then it continually updates it, and it updates your no stop time. So it will then configure your decompression stop requirements. Now, because it's continual, it will be up if you go down, say at Stony, you go all the way down to a hydro box, 35 meters, and you only spend a couple of minutes there, and then you come up to the 20 meters shelf. Your plan from the tables, you'll have said 35 meters, and therefore it will have a much longer decompression stop. Whereas your computer, because it's doing it continually, it knows that you've come up, so it knows that you've started off gassing because you are at a decreased depth, so you're not as deep. So often the deco stop that your computer will tell you to do will be less than your plan. Computers are normally right. I don't think there's never really been an instance of computers being wrong. So if a computer tells you you're fine to go up, even though your plan says you shouldn't be, it's often you can follow your computer normally and go up. Yeah, issues warning if you're going too fast, if you're ascending too fast, or if you've missed a stop. Yeah, so it doesn't replace your plan. So you can use the computers to plan your dive, so you can put the plan into them, which is quite useful. You still want to agree timing signals with your buddy, so that you don't kind of so if you're trying to tell them you've got 1 minute left on your stop and they're like, come on, let's go, you need to be able to tell them that you have 1 minute left, or tell them that your stops are finished and you're ready to ascend. You need to make sure, now that we are doing decompression stops, the dive time is going to be extended. So you don't need to, you need to not just think about the time that you're going to be spending at depth. You need to now be thinking about the time that you're going to be spending on your stop as well. So you need to add that time onto the length of the dive and make sure you've got enough air to do that stop, which you should do, because we always run with plenty of excess air. Your computer can fail, so do you take a backup? Do you take a backup computer, or do you do a plan and then you take the plan with you as well, so that on a slate, so that if your computer fails, you then can stick to the plan. Using the little slate, you can take that down with you, and it has a little, you can see on there, it's quite just longer or just deeper. So, and then plan. So your plan is what you should be doing. If you've gone a little bit longer, you can write in what you should do if you spend an extra 5 minutes, or if you just deeper, if you go a couple of meters deeper. That's quite a good backup thing to have. Yeah, don't try not to share your own computer. Obviously, we do share them in the club, but don't share them on the day that you're diving, because your computer will be measuring your off-gassing from your first dive when you're doing your surface interval, and it will store that data. So your second dive, it automatically starts it on like you would on a table C, for example, because you're on a tissue code C. Whereas if you're sharing that computer around, it might say you might be on tissue code C, but you've got a computer from someone else who came up and is now on tissue code A. The computer that you're now using thinks you're tissue code A when you're not, so you might end up getting the bends and not doing the deco stops that you need to do. So it's important that you keep your own computer kind of on you for the day. You can mix tables and computers between your buddy pair, but you kind of don't really want to. So if the buddy pair are a mix, say one person is using tables and one person is using a computer, you do what the person who's diving by the table says, because the table is always more conservative. So you also get another type, nitrox computers. They're capable of being programmed for nitrox mixes because there's obviously different amounts of nitrogen and oxygen in them. So a lot of computers nowadays will work for both, but you just need to tell it and make sure it knows what air you are or what gas you're breathing. So if you leave it set for air if you want, that reduces the risk of your DCIs. However, that defeats the whole point of diving on nitrox. You're going to be diving on it so that you can have less stops and spend longer at depth. So you want to actually change it and set it for your nitrox. If you set it to an intermediate nitrox, so say you're diving on nitrox 36, you can set it to nitrox 32, and it will give you the benefits of nitrox 32, but you'll still have that safeguard of using 36 over 32. And then all other procedures are the same as you would be if you were diving on air. Nitrox capable computers also track your oxygen exposure, so your CNS percentage. So that's something you need to do because you're now diving for longer because you're on nitrox. And some computers are capable of being able to change mix during the dive. So when you start getting into like really advanced like tech diving, you might take 2 cylinders with you, one that is a different nitrox blend to another one, because you can go deeper with lighter nitrox, like one that's closer to 21%. But when you come up and you're not as deep anymore and it's safe to use, say, nitrox 36, it's better for your off-gassing and you off-gas quicker, so you have less stops to do, so you might want to switch over. So having a computer that can change is quite a good idea. So these are for the tables that you look at when you're traveling with your diving. So tables that we all been using before that you're all familiar with are for diving at sea level. Now, obviously, when you go down in the water, the pressure increases. However, when you go above sea level, the pressure decreases. So you might have to use a different table or a different level depending on the depth of the altitude that you're going to. So you can see here, for example, I think I might be covering it up, but there we go. So level 1 is that little triangle on the bottom, where if you're diving kind of at 0 altitude, you can use level 1 up and when it's at normal pressure. However, once you get up to say altitude of 1,000 meters, you're now looking at the line that's in a level half in a level 3 and slightly in level 2. When obviously the storms and weather will change the air pressure, so you have a cold front, which is high. I think that's a low pressure. Low pressure, high pressure. That is, I think. That will be changing the pressure, even though you haven't changed your altitude. So by being able to measure the atmospheric pressure, which is on the bottom, that will also play a part in what level table to use. So you need to bear that in mind when you're diving at altitude. There we go. So you firstly trace the sea level and then the pressure. So normally it will be at atmospheric pressure of 1,000 millibar. Go up to 800 meters, say, on a level 2 where they intersect. So you make sure to use a level 2 table. If it's borderline, so say you're at 900 meters at 1000 millibar, you can see it's where the line is. Again, we always err on the side of caution, so you would go to level 3 table rather than staying on level 2. Now, with flights, that also decreases the pressure, and higher ground decreases the pressure. So this is the transfer table. So if you are on an atmospheric pressure of 995 millibar, and the highest point of the journey is going to reach 1000 meters, and you're starting on a tissue code A, this might be the profile of the walk that you're doing, or the car journey home, for example. You might be going over a big mountain or a hill to get home. So you're starting at 7 AM on a level 3. Let's go on here. Here we go. So we're starting level 3. So we've got at 7 AM, we've got an A1. So that means we are on tissue code A on the level 1 table. So that's our last level. So we stick to level A. So tissue code A level 1. You see where the line is. Now we've looked at the previous table, and we found that the area that we're going to is going to be in need of a level 3 table. So we have to then change our tissue code to match the correct table. So this line here goes across from tissue code A level 1, last level 1, all the way across to level 3, because we're now using a level 3 table. And you can see that our tissue code is actually a B. So this would mean that we would have to use a table B when we get back. So we then go from a table B here. So we've come with our last level is a 3. So we've got a B3. We've now descended back down to atmospheric pressure of 995 millibars. So that is a level 1 zone on the previous table. So we go along from our last level on a tissue code B to B3, goes on to level 1, and we are still a tissue code B. So now if we're now going to go diving after that drive, we need to use a table for a tissue code B, so a B table. That's quite complicated. There's a lot of planning that you need to do when you're driving around. It's not the easiest thing to do. It doesn't make sense sometimes either, but it's quite a thing, something you need to look after. So here we go. We're doing another example. Starting atmospheric pressure of 995 millibar, 3 hours on a pressurized aircraft, and we are arriving on the atmospheric pressure on arrival is 1010 millibar. So this would be our map of our altitude. So we're ascending, and then we're going along at the height and then descending. So at 7 AM, our flight is at level 4. So if we are on a tissue code A at level 1, we will go across to level 4, as you can see the blue arrow on the table. So level 4, last level 1, it takes us to tissue code C. Now we're going to come back down and ascend C4, so level 4 C. We then have our interval, or our flight, and after a 3-hour surface interval from a C tissue code, we've now got down to a B tissue code. So we now need to start looking at our last level tissue code is B, but the level stays the same because we're still at that height. So tissue code B, last level 4. If we're now descending down to the sea level, where the atmospheric pressure is 1010 millibar, sorry, that is a level 1 zone. So we go across to level 1 where the blue arrow is, and our tissue code is now on the level 1 tables an A. So it's what it was before. But if you have a shorter flight, for example, you might, and then you're landing somewhere that's at different pressure or different height, it will be quite important and something you need to keep an eye on. That is probably one of the more complicated parts of doing sports diver. So just if you don't get that to begin with, you can kind of look over it in your books that you've got now, because you've all got the training pack. So diving, traveling and flying. There we go, we've got the tissue code here. We've surfaced from a dive or tissue code F at level 1. We've had an interval. So we're now on a tissue code D, still at level 1. We've now ascended the hill, going over a hill to get to the airport, which is 1,095 meters. So we are going to ascend, and when we get to that height, we will look back at the table. So we're going 1,095. That first table we think with all the lines would say that we're now at a level 3, and we are now on a tissue code F. We go across the hill, we get to the other side. We started on a tissue code F at level 3, and then that tissue code F translates to, after 3 hours, 3 hours on the hill, that translates to a D1 for a level 1 table. And then we get to the end, we're at a B. We've had a slightly longer surface interval here, down at sea level. We have had 3.5 hours. So our surface interval 3.5 hours has turned our tissue code of D into a tissue code of B, still at level 1. And now we're ascending to level 4, and our tissue code B at level 4 becomes tissue code D. So we need to make sure we know that we are now tissue code D4. That was probably just a lot of talking at you, but bear with us. This is obviously stuff that you will need to be familiar with. However, your computers will often do this for you. So they will self-adjust to, well, most of them will self-adjust to altitude diving, not all of them. So again, make sure you read the manufacturer's instructions and the manuals, because you may have to set something up for it to do it automatically. When you're traveling or flying, some computers are switched off. However, they might still be checking the background pressure changes and working out what tissue code you're on. If you're going to be doing a dive and then flying, you need to make sure you spend long enough having a surface interval so your tissue code is low enough that when you ascend and the pressure decreases in the plane, you are not going to suddenly get bent. That is definitely something to watch out for. So if you're going on holiday or you're going away diving, you will often want to not do a dive in the morning and then fly home in the evening. It'll be quite dangerous to do that. So you always want to dive the day before leaving, or even the day before that, 2 days before leaving, just to be on the safe side. So you can use tables, or if your computer does it automatically for you, you can leave it to do it. Before you're diving, make sure you have a good surface interval after a flight. So don't land, go straight to the dive shop, get the kit up, and then go diving, because your tissue code might be different. So something to just kind of bear in mind when you're doing it. And then keep your first dive with conservative limits. So don't push the boundaries. Make sure you kind of stay well within them, just to be safe. And then after your dive, again, if you're flying after diving, have a good surface interval before you fly. So tables and computers, they're not infallible. They do go wrong. You might plan your dive wrong on a table, or the computer might malfunction, might have the pressure sensor might be faulty or something. So they're not necessarily the best thing to completely rely on. Sometimes it might be good to have a backup, but they're just dive planning tools, really. So don't push their limits, because they might break or they might be damaging to you. Divers as well, especially divers, are not infallible. We make mistakes, we smoke, we drink, we get dehydrated, we get tired, we get cold, we get tired from exercising too much, like muscle soreness, for example. they're all factors that will affect your plan and affect the conditions that you're going to be facing, and your decompression and off-gassing. So safety margins, obviously your body accumulates the nitrogen and oxygen over a series of dives. So if you're diving straight after another one, you need to make sure that you're kind of putting some safety margins in, so you limit your depth and your time. It can affect the choice of other dives. So if you say you do your deeper dive in the morning, your tissue code might then mean you haven't got enough gas to have a dive long enough to do and see the next site. So or you might not be able to go deep enough to see the next site. So it's just a good thing to bear in mind. Because the accumulation of nitrogen and oxygen can limit what you can do. Always do your deepest dive first. Just means that you're not going to be limited by how deep you can go because you've just done a dive and you're on a different tissue code. So your first dive is your deeper one. And generally, you recommend no more than 3 dives in a 24-hour period. So you might go to Stony, you might be able to squeeze in 3 dives in a day if you kind of push through it. And it's advisable to limit your decompression stops to a total of 20 minutes within a 24-hour period. So you don't do lots of deco diving with lots of stops. So you just make sure you don't spend any more than 20 minutes decoing. You still do your safety stop. You do it following a no-stop dive. It's not mandatory. So you guys have all done your safety stops when you did your ocean diver or everything else you've done. It's not mandatory, but it is just a safety precautions put in place. So that is an example that you are aware of and that you've done before. So these are just some more precautions to put in place when you're diving a lot in a day or a lot over a short period. So when you're using nitrox for deeper diving, the reason you use it is because it reduces the nitrogen and so reduces the chances of nitrogen narcosis at depth. You have longer no stop times, so you can spend more time diving and less time waiting around to deco. You can use a richer mix for decompression. So if you use a more oxygen heavy mix, your nitrogen will be off-gassed quicker and eliminated quicker, and it also just adds more safety margins. So say you deco on a different gas to the one that, so say you deco on nitrox 36, but you use say you're doing it on 32, it adds in that safety margin of the 36 being better at eliminating the nitrogen. And again, you make sure the recommended max partial pressure of oxygen is 1.4 bar for the air that you're breathing or gas you're breathing. You must track your oxygen uptake as well as your nitrogen uptake for your CNS using the oxygen toxicity table that we saw earlier. So I have a quick quiz before we finish. It's been a long lecture. There's a lot to get through on this one. But we haven't got any pool sessions tonight, which is good. If I am diving with a diving computer and my buddy doesn't have one, can we share the computer? You probably saw the answer there. I'll give you a minute to think. No, you don't want to share because of keeping track of previous dives during the day. If you've just bought a new computer, what is the first thing you should do whenever you buy one? So first thing, as we said, always read the instruction manual so you know what the hell your computer is telling you if it starts beeping at you, and just so you know how to read it and how to use it better and make the most of it. So a quick summary, we've covered what it's like to be diving deeper. Now should be able, after this, you'll be able to dive down to 35 meters and then on to 20. So you can progressively dive deeper, so you'll experience increased effective nitrogen. So nitrogen affects nitrogen narcosis, the oxygen effects, decompression and decompression stops. So we had a quick look at that. We did some examples. We did some dive planning using the tables, and we've got started to look at how dive computers work and kind of what they do for you and how you can use them and how you can understand what they're doing for you. And we looked at traveling and diving, so flying and traveling over hills, for example. And we looked at safety margins, so just make sure you're safe, so you don't push it to the limit. And using nitrogen for deeper nitrox for deeper diving. So that is the end. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my and Imi's voices. It's a longer lecture, that one. The sports diver ones are often longer. But if you've got any questions, just throw them in. If you don't, then I guess you're free to go. So thank you very much, guys. We'll be doing another lecture next week for ST5. So same time as always, hang around a bit longer. They're a bit longer than the other lectures, so just be aware.